My name's Joseph and I'm from the education team. But thank you very much for coming. I would now like to invite the President of the Legislative Council, the Honourable Ben Franklin MLC, to officially open the program. Mr. President.
Well, thank you very much, Joseph, and good evening to all of you, whether in the room or online. And I extend a very warm welcome to the Parliament of New South Wales for tonight's event, Parliament Unpacked, Understanding Budget Estimates. For those who I don't know, and I do know a few in the room, my name is Ben Franklin. I am the President of the Legislative Council, or the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament, and one of the two presiding officers here alongside my good friend, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, Greg Piper. Can I begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're all meeting this evening, the Gadigal people, and I extend those respects to elders past and present. I thank them for their custodianship of this land for many tens of thousands of years, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us or online. By acknowledging country in Parliament, we hope to break down barriers and to build trust moving forward. And by working alongside Aboriginal communities, as we did last week with a Young Aboriginal Leaders program where we hosted 20 incredible young Indigenous leaders from across this state in the Parliament for 4 days, we hope to build a better future for all. Now, tonight marks the second event in our 2025 Parliament Unpacked series, an initiative led by the Parliament's Communications, Education and Engagement team. And this initiative is all about demystifying and communicating the inner workings of our legislature and democracy right here in this state. When people think of Parliament, many people might imagine the green and red chambers where people debate issues, or more often perhaps yell at each other, where legislation's introduced and where decisions are made that truly affect the future of our state. And rightly so. My house, Nichole Overall's house, the Legislative Council, has been doing just that since its first sitting in 1824, more than 200 years ago. But much of Parliament's work happens outside the chambers, when the House isn't sitting. And tonight's topic, budget estimates, is a great example of that. As a summary, budget estimates is a crucial process in our Westminster system by which the Legislative Council scrutinises the actions of government by questioning ministers and senior public servants about expenditure and the performance of their agencies. This scrutiny is conducted by the 8 portfolio committees of the New South Wales Upper House, ensuring that every area of government is covered. Now, it's fair to say that budget estimates are a key process for keeping the executive to account and a genuinely fine example of our democracy at work. I know for me, as both a former minister who had to be subjected to budget estimates and now as the only non-government member required to appear at a budget estimates hearing, I can say the process is both incredibly valuable, but perhaps at times also quite stressful. But with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the panel we have for you tonight. And we really have 3 extraordinary people who will be able to shed light on all sides of the budget estimates process. Starting with the Honourable Anoulack Chanthivong, who is the New South Wales Labor member for the Legislative Assembly representing the electorate of Macquarie Fields since he was elected in 2015. He is here as the Minister for Better Regulation and Fair Trading, the Minister for Industry and Trade, the Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology, the Minister for Building and the Minister for Corrections. So he has quite a lot of portfolios which he has scrutinised in the budget estimates process. More than that, though, he is an extremely good human being and a very fine minister indeed, something that's acknowledged across all sides of politics. On the other side of the political chasm, both in terms of the lower house compared to the upper house and the government compared to the opposition, we have the Honourable Nichole Overall, a member of the New South Wales National Party who joined the Legislative Council last year. But Nichole is one of those very rare people who has served in both houses. She was also the member for Monero in the Legislative Assembly. Nichole's currently a member of Portfolio Committees 5 and 6, oversighting justice and communities and transport and the arts, respectively. I had the privilege of seeing Nichole perform in her first budget estimates a few months ago, and the general acknowledgement across all sides is that she is a star on the rise, and we look forward to seeing that star rise very highly indeed.
No pressure.
Finally, we have Mark Webb. Now, Mark is not a politician. He's in fact the Chief Executive of the New South Wales Department of Parliamentary Services. That's the department that ensures the smooth operation of our Parliament. Now, as the Chief Executive, Mark has actually sat through many budget estimates hearings, certainly a number by my side, but also at the side of presidents before me as a part of Portfolio Number 1, the Premier and Finance Portfolio Committee. Can I say all three members here are not only very good people, extremely impressive public servants, but they are also all personal friends to me personally. They are people of integrity, of decency, and whose focus is solely on doing the right thing for the people of New South Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for taking the time to be here in the Parliament of New South Wales, the mother parliament of the nation. You're all very welcome here anytime. I hope you enjoy this evening's session. I hope you find it valuable, interesting, and that you take something away with you that makes your belief in the good sense of the Parliament of New South Wales and the importance of our democracy in this state, that it will last for many, many years to come. Thank you very much, and I'll now hand over to Joseph.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for that very warm welcome. So today we have an audience comprising physical attendees here in the Jubilee Room, but we are also joined by an online audience who are watching the live stream. And the theme, as the President mentioned, is budget estimates, the process run by the Legislative Council's portfolio committees over several weeks a year. It's in fact held in this very room quite often, and the members would be using the horseshoe table that the panel is using today, and ministers and their senior officials would be occupying roughly around where the front rows are today. And they're full-day sessions where basically ministers and senior officials are questioned by members of Parliament on their decisions and use of public resources, quite robustly, I might add. Now, we're going to start the program with 3 questions from me, but that's just to get the conversation started. I would really like this evening to be a conversation between you and the panel as well. So after my first 3 questions, I'm going to turn to you, the audience. There's going to be microphones available for those of you in the room. For our online audience, there's an online facility for you to submit questions as well. So please start thinking of your questions now as you listen into the beginning part of the program. I would just like to note that the theme is budget estimates, so ideally your question would be consistent with that theme. Okay, so I'm just going to start the discussion with a question for the entire panel, and it's about your roles and experience in the budget estimates process. Could you please each share a bit about your experience with budget estimates hearings and what it is that you do in these hearings as a minister, as a member of the Legislative Council, and a senior executive of a public agency? Perhaps we could start with the Minister.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can I thank everybody for coming tonight? It's really encouraging for me, and no doubt for all of us, to see so many people giving up their time on a Tuesday winter evening to come see their democracy at work. And I do think fundamentally our democracy is something really special to all of us, to us all. And I think the fact that it's so accessible makes it a really important part of our institutional and behavioural framework. So, but in short answer to your question, yeah, I mean, I've been to now, this will be my 3rd year going to budget estimates. I think my experience for me has been, I think if you're well prepared, then you're obviously well best to answer as many questions as you can. Now, some questions can be quite specific, where you may not necessarily have the answers, and you can always take that on notice. So, I mean, what I find, I suppose, in that is budget estimates, it's focused on the budget and the performance of the agencies and the departments that report to me, but also some of the questions aren't necessarily about that as well. So there is a bit of, I suppose, political game playing from the opposition, which is, it's not unexpected, which is okay, and really just a case of, making sure that you're well informed, understand your portfolio as well, and actually just give the best answers that you've actually got. And sometimes there may not be an answer that you have, because the questions can be quite specific, and just take those on notice. Or you can also refer them to your departmental officials if the committee prefers a much more specific answer. So look, I think it's part of our democracy. We do it twice a year in this room and other rooms as well, and I think it's good that the process itself allows questions from all across the committee, not just from opposition members, also from the crossbench, and also from government members as well, if they choose to ask.
Thank you. Mrs. Overall.
Yes, thank you. And it is lovely to be here with you all. And I note that Joseph said in his introduction, those who are worried about public exposure to sit at the back of the room. So I don't think the Minister and I will be joining you down there. No great concern about public exposure. And despite what the President said, I promise that we won't spend too much time yelling at each other this evening. But look, as the newest member of the Legislative Council, I was only sworn in February of this year, and it was quite the baptism of fire because 2 weeks after being sworn in, I was straight into 3 weeks of budget estimates. Prior to that, as President had mentioned, I was the member for Monero. I had been elected in a by-election and had served 13 months in that role up until March 2023. So it is a very interesting and different aspect that I'm able to bring, having seen it from the perspective of the lower house. I wasn't a minister, obviously, but seeing my colleagues at that time when we as the Nationals Liberals government were in power, and to know what they went through from that lower house perspective. Then to come into the Legislative Council, which is an absolute privilege and honour to be sworn into this role. And just as a little aside there, my background is as a journalist, author and historian, so I love throwing those little tidbits in whenever I can. I'm the 866th member of the Legislative Council since 1824, but I'm only the 69th woman in all of that time. But yes, to come into that role in a completely new way, and obviously having an idea of political processes and the differences between the houses, but it's not until you are there in the thick of it as such that you really see the differences, the pronounced differences between the operations of both. So as I said, it was very much a baptism of fire, but dare I say it was an incredibly enjoyable one. And you might understand when I tell you that a little bit of an adrenaline rush to come straight into it. I was there for 6 sessions of budget estimates across a range of ministers, including Penny Sharp, the Honourable Penny Sharp, John Graham, Tara Moriarty, the Minister for Local Government, Ron Honig, who of course is in the lower house as well. So it was very much an opportunity to be broad in what I was experiencing at that time, and the opportunity to ask questions of those ministers as well. And I think that I would come out of it saying, having done my first round there in February, March, and we're about to have another budget estimate session in August, of course the budget that was brought down yesterday by the Treasurer, I would say that my summation of it would be that you have to be a little bit of a lawyer, perhaps a lot of a lawyer. Think of me as Perry Mason, if you like. Part investigative journalist, part Sherlock Holmes, or maybe Miss Marple when it comes to the forensic analysis. But mostly you have to be a good political representative, because that is the role of budget estimates. That is the role of the Legislative Council, the House of Review, and to represent the constituents, the voters of New South Wales by holding the government of the day to account. That is the role of the LC, that is the role of budget estimates, and as the Minister has mentioned, it can be very broad, and I'm sure you may have questions around all of that we'll get to shortly, but the diversity of it, the breadth of what we're able to cover, and in the end achieving the outcomes of what budget estimates has always been about, is the scrutiny, the review, and holding the government to account in the decisions that it is making and it isn't making. Now, I could go on probably for the entire time just to talk about my experience, but I'll hand over to Mark, and I really look forward to taking your questions on it as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. So, hi everyone, I'm Mark Webb. I look after the Department of Parliamentary Services here. So my role in budget estimates is as a public servant. It probably started 20 years ago when I was working for the federal public sector, and I used to attend Senate estimates in Canberra or in Parliament House there. Never on the front bench, never answering the questions directly back then. Back then I was sitting at the next row behind, waiting for a question to be answered, where I would have the answer on a sheet of paper that I could hand forward to my secretary and have the secretary answer that question. The feds are a little different. The public servants are front and centre in the federal process, whereas in the New South Wales process, ministers are front and centre, and so there is a little bit of a difference of emphasis there. When I came down to New South Wales and started working in the New South Wales public sector, supporting secretaries in agencies that I work for, going through the budget estimates process, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the preparation that the public sector has to go through to be ready for budget estimates, which is a huge, dwarfs the amount of time that's actually spent in the chair answering questions. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then when I came here to be the Chief Executive of Parliamentary Services, we are scrutinised as a part of the budget estimates process as well. Interestingly, only though in my duties to the Legislative Council. I can't be asked a question about the duties I perform for the Legislative Assembly because of comedy between the houses, which has been a little topical over the last few days. Fortunately, no one has had to issue a summons for my arrest at any point yet so far. So for instance, if a question was asked about electorate officers that lower house members have, I would not answer that question as part of budget estimates, but if it's asked about something to do with the Parliament as a whole or about the Legislative Council, I would. So I sit with the President through that process. Questions are usually directed to the Minister, or in my case, the President in the first instance, but through them to me, and then we answer questions about whatever can come up through that process. I know there are a lot of public servants watching online today. To all of you, I say thank you and well done. You do excellent work, not just in the people that sit at that front desk, but I know there are many of you who are involved in that preparation work, and that is so vital to a good quality scrutiny of the executive that comes through the estimates process. And I did want to take an opportunity to say well done to all of you, both here in the room and watching online. Thank you for that service.
Well, thank you, Mark, because I'm involved in that process in DPS, where I write notes for you. But thank you very much, everybody. And my next question is for Mrs. Overall, who, as a member of the Legislative Council, we've heard that your role is to ask questions. Now, can I ask how you prepare those questions? What are some of the work that goes into it? What kind of research do you do? Is there a specific strategy? And how do you prioritise between the different issues that must be competing for your attention?
Thanks, Joseph. And I think that is one of the things coming to it as the newest member of the Legislative Council, the baby of the Legislative Council, as it turns out. I'm sure that for my first experience, that will differ greatly from my next experience of it, and as I continue to serve in this House. But what I can say is that my background, I believe, has served me greatly in order to fulfil this role of questioner, examiner, as part of budget estimates process. So as I mentioned, journalist, author and historian, so I'm very much a researcher. And that was the first thing that I did, knowing that I was going to be coming into the Parliament at this time, and with that expectation of heading into estimates straight away, I was able to sit down and put my research skills to great use. And one of the first things that I did, and people tell me that I should have some hobbies instead, read Hansard. And read pretty much over the last couple of years of the time of the current government and the budget estimates that they had already been through during their period in government. So that gave me a good grounding on where things were at, the type of questions that had previously been asked. So I wasn't going down the rabbit hole of covering ground that had already been covered, and also for the ministers, and in respect to the ministers, that they weren't going over questions and answers of things that they had already dealt with previously. Obviously, you also get together with your parliamentary colleagues. For me, it's the National Party colleagues and our teams. And of course, our teams in opposition are very small. very, very small for a very, very large workload. As it turns out, as Ben had mentioned, the President had mentioned, I'm on 2 of those standing committees, but I'm also on a 3rd electoral committee. We do the budget estimates work. I have 2 inquiries coming up, including on the illegal tobacco trade, and I have 1 staff member. So the workload is huge in terms of being new to the Parliament when so many others have already had grounding, whether for many years, like the Minister, or at the very least for those new to this Parliament, still a couple of years. So to get across it very quickly. But I will say that both the parliamentary staff, my colleagues, and even the other side, when we went into the estimates themselves, were incredibly helpful. So it's not, while there is a degree of a battleground, it is a blood sport, as some say, without the blood. To a degree, it's also very collegiate, and I found that in my preparation for this first round of estimates. So all of those things I was able to utilise to my advantage. I now think that when we go into the next round in August, I will be better prepared still, because I know what we've been through now. My expectations have also changed in many ways of what my role will be, how the different ministers respond, the type of areas that we want to go to. So dare I say, to quote my National Party upper house colleague Wes Fang, it is almost like Christmas Day, very exciting to be looking forward to it. I don't think you'll be looking forward to it in quite the same way, Minister.
A different experience on the other side of the table.
Yes.
Yeah. And thank you so much, Mrs. Overall. And that's actually where my next question's going. It's my next question's for Minister Chanthivong and Mr. Webb. We've just heard about how thoroughly Mrs. Overall prepares for her estimates. How does it look from your side? How do you go into the estimates process? How do you do your research? Do you have people helping you? And do ministers and public servants work together, or is there an independent process?
Well, look, certainly, I always believe, being well prepared is fundamental. I think you've got to know your policy well. You've got to know some basic facts about your portfolios. I think understand the context of the reforms that you're trying to do, and also understand the risk areas in my case, in each one of my 5 portfolios, where the questions are going to be coming from. So it's always anticipating where, I suppose, from the opposition's perspective, their goal is to, one sense, trying to find a story, trying to demonstrate that perhaps a minister is not on top of his or her game. So I think in one sense, forewarned is forearmed. Where the opposition is sort of going with their questions, but also the areas where they believe might be the greatest risk for a minister fronting estimates. In terms of preparation, yes, certainly I'm fortunate to have a good staff in the office, and also we obviously seek advice and information from the public service as well. So in government, you do have more resources, which is the great thing about being government, given the reforms and the work that you have to do. So certainly there is lots of preparation. It's from my perspective, lots of risk identification, and also I think practicing. Practice is a good thing. That is, role playing is not a bad. It's the thing that I do. I find it useful. It gives the opportunity for the staff to grill me, and they enjoy it too much, I have to say, when we do the reverse role play. But I think it's an important part of our democracy, and I think it's an important part of your own skills development as a minister as well.
So, Joseph, I was going to claim that I did all the work myself and all the preparation, but you let the cat out of the bag before when you said that you helped me with the preparation. Now, it is a whole department effort to prepare for budget estimates. You are looking to make sure you are covering all the functions of your department, all the policy areas. If you're in a line agency, incidents, things that might have happened in the period, etc. If you're in a policy dimension, what the current topical policies are, etc. The legislature's one is a little interesting. It is half concepts of high democracy and the future of parliamentary democracy in the state, and sometimes it's a workplace grievance process where a member will say, I really don't like the way you did the catering last week.
Just excuse our division's been called. I just got to go.
Been called?
I'll be back.
Oh, the things I'll say in your absence, Minister.
Thank you, Minister.
So lots of preparation from the staff. There is a Freddo frog in it for whichever staff member comes up with the trickiest question to ask me in the preparation. So like the Minister, we do try to anticipate what some questions would be. I do say to staff sometimes, ask me the question, but not only ask me the question, find the meanest way to ask the question. I then generally find that the members are so much nicer than the meanest. My staff can be quite mean at times. So, but yeah, you're really trying to make sure you're seeing the policy areas and the issues that you have from multiple angles. It's very easy to get into a mode where you know why you did a certain thing or why your department did a certain thing, but you also need to understand how other people would have perceived the things that you've done, and therefore a question might come in that is quite differently framed and formulated than you would have contextualize the issue as well. And that is when we get on to talk to the actual back and forth, one of the things you do have to be careful of is to not accept a framing of a question that you think where the framing is wrong. It's a trick for young players is you head down a path of accepting a framing of a question when you don't actually agree with the framing of the question, and sometimes you have to go back and forth a little bit there. So all that kind of preparation. Yes, we do interact with the Minister, in our case, the President's office going forward. Of course, the President will have issues that he wishes to be briefed on to make sure that he has all the facts, figures, data to his hand so he can answer questions. Scrutiny is so important. It's such a major function of a parliament, but also it's what makes parliamentary democracy more broadly work. And every public servant I know that is involved in things like estimates takes that scrutiny very, very seriously. It is an important part of what makes democracy kind of work. So you want to be able to try and answer as many questions in the room as you possibly can. Sometimes you will get I was once asked whether I could demonstrate that all the cows that produce milk that is used in Parliament House, all of those cows are individually domiciled within the boundaries of New South Wales. I could not do that in the moment. That is, I do not have a personal relationship with every cow that produces milk that comes into Parliament House, so I did have to go and do a little bit of checking on that one. So sometimes you do get a very specific question that requires you to, maybe go take it on notice and look into it afterwards. But generally speaking, you want to be able to answer the questions. You want the back and forth with the members. You want to be able to help get to the heart of any issue that's coming up so that scrutiny can occur and can occur incredibly well. And to that end, I know I'm here representing the public sector, but I would give a shout out to the Secretariat staff that run the budget estimates process. They do an incredible amount of work to both prep the members going in and to be ready for it, but also to make sure that the public service knows what to expect from a process point of view, not from a question point of view, but from a process point of view, and to make sure the whole thing moves incredibly smoothly, as does people like my Hansard team, my audio-visual team. There's a whole infrastructure that happens here at Parliament to make sure this process is as smooth as possible so that we can get those scrutiny aspects happening in the most effective way possible.
Well, thank you so much for those insightful responses. Now, I would just like to note for the benefit of our online audience, we in the room could hear the faint bells ringing, and there were the bells calling the lower house members to the chamber, and that's where the Minister has gone to. It wasn't our robust questioning that scared him away. Okay, as promised, I've asked my 3 questions. I would now like to turn to you for questions. So this is your opportunity to ask questions directly to our panel. So if you're here in the Jubilee Room, my colleagues Daniela and Dan have roving mics. There's also a facility to lodge questions for our online audience. And I am now beginning to stall because I'm waiting for a hand to go up. Yes, thank you very much, sir. So we'll go to that gentleman and then we'll turn to our online audience who are already submitting questions.
Hi, my name's Jesse. Have you ever had problems with the budget estimates that there has been a problem in how the accounting was done, and so the information, who gets the accounting to have the information that everyone's asking the questions on, and has that ever been a problem?
I mean, the starting point is the budget papers, right? Yeah. So,
Yes.
I mean, I guess it is possible, but I love my Treasury colleagues, and I'm sure they never get anything wrong in the budget papers. But that is the starting point for the figures, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. So from the budget papers, once they're tabled, then of course the committees come together in order to conduct the estimates. So I think, Jesse, that's probably what we're looking for. And when you go back through the history of estimates, as some people without hobbies have done, that's how it first started, that it was essentially line by line analysis of the budget to find the discrepancies, to find, where the spending had increased, where the spending had decreased. So looking for those anomalies is a central part of that. And then, of course, once the estimates process is complete, and it's never quite complete as such, because the process has changed, that it takes place throughout the year, whereas originally, as I understand it, it used to be a much shorter process. So they called the inquiries, the committees together, the questions were asked, the deal was done, the information was put forward, and that was it. Whereas now we also have things like supplementary hearings. So it's an ongoing process in order to continue to facilitate and find information that's about making that information publicly accessible. So it's not just the scrutiny from the parliamentary perspective, but it's ensuring that that information is then on the public record. It is available to all of you, to all voters throughout New South Wales, and obviously beyond that as well, but so that they can also look into these things themselves and have information and access to that knowledge. And I will say, and a shout out as well to the media, because the media play such an important role in that as well, and again have become increasingly important in that, in terms of bringing more attention to the estimates process and making that information accessible and available to the public, so that you have a better idea of what we're doing, and more importantly, what the government is doing in that space as well.
There's one area where things can go a little wrong. So you cut your data when you're doing the preparation, you're preparing your notes. You cut your data in a certain way, like you put your budget information down in a certain way, grouping it by division of my department or something along those lines. And it might not just be budget data. There might be other, how many people came to the Parliament Unpacked session about budget estimates. I mean, if any member wants to get a bit meta at the next estimates, they could ask me about that. So you've got all this
I'll
data.
make a note.
That's right. Sometimes, though, the question you get asked doesn't quite match up with the data that you've prepared. It may be the question might be you've cut it by division, and the question gets asked, I want that information by tenure of staff, or something along those lines. And so in those cases, sometimes you can on the fly go, oh yes, actually I can answer that because I've just got to move the information around a little bit. But sometimes it means you get it slightly wrong. And so there is a process that happens after estimates where you get a chance to answer all of the questions you took on notice, but also you can be asked supplementary questions. There have been a couple of times where I've also, as a part of that process, had to go back and say, I said 7 in the room, but on reflection, when I got out of the room, the answer was actually 1,455. So it's sometimes you do have to correct the record if you have, in attempting to answer the question in the room, looked at the data in a slightly not the purpose for which it was prepared, and maybe got something slightly wrong there. So that's another area where inconsistency can come in.
Welcome back, Minister. So we just had our first question from the audience, and it was about numbers, and it were basically information that's supplied to you, which may be incorrect or doesn't quite match what you need in terms of answering the question, and how you deal with those instances.
Oh, look, if you don't know the answer, you can always just take it on notice, because I think it's unrealistic to expect any minister from any side of politics to remember every number to the decimal point. So surely the broad numbers you may be familiar with, what's your budget size, for example, what's the size of your departmental staff. But if you're asking about, what was spent on this particular aspect to the you just don't have those numbers. And I think it's not unreasonable to say, look, I'll take that on notice, but certainly the government is always, looking at ways to ensure that it spends appropriately. So I don't think it's no go that you don't know. It's not an issue, depending on the question, of course. But.
Well, thank you very much. Now, we've had a couple of online questions come in, and they're to do with how the role gets divided up between public servants and politicians when it comes to estimates. So I'll read one of it out. How do politicians and public servants interact in estimates? Where does politics end and bureaucracy begin?
I suspect politics never ends, is the short answer. But certainly I know, as Minister, I'm there for about 3 hours, and each member of the committee gets the allocated 10 minutes. And if I need advice from the senior public servants, I'll seek it, or I can request the public servant answer on the behalf of myself if obviously they want more details. And I understand that the afternoon is when it's all public servants. So it's an all-day process for the bureaucracy from morning to the end, but also, of course, there are days before you prepare as well. So.
And are the questions very different? The kind of questions that get asked of ministers, are they different to the kind of questions you ask of secretaries, for instance?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably fair to say that there is more political loading on questions that go to politicians, if that makes sense. So there can be more questions that go to kind of a why do you have this policy kind of space, a little bit more. With the public servants, there's a little bit more how is this policy being implemented, so it's a little bit more about the mechanisms of it. You'll notice if you watch secretaries and deputy secretaries responding to the questions, that they always steer clear of politics. They are not there to answer political questions. They're there to answer questions about the good governance of the state through how they do their work. So most secretaries are excellent at being able to have a political question come in and answer the bureaucratic dimension of that question coming through, and not kind of get caught up in the politics of a situation. So there is a slight difference in the nature and the tone of the questions, I think, from the morning to the afternoon. But as the Minister said, when the Minister is in the room, or in my case the President is in the room, the questions are to the Minister or the President, and then it's basically I always take the President's lead in whether he wants me to answer a question or to provide him with some information that might assist him answer the question, or sometimes just leave him to it and let him go. So, yeah.
Yes, I think I would say that it's quite defined in that, and Mark is correct, that when we're asking the questions of the staff, the public servants, the departmental and agency heads, it is very much we're looking for factual answers, and they must provide us with those factual answers one way or another. When it comes to, from an opposition perspective, asking questions of the government, I guess I'd quote Jim Hacker from Yes Minister and say that the question, the role of opposition is to ask the hard questions, to which Sir Humphrey Appleby replied, and the role of government is not to answer them. So that is part of the core of what we do. The questions would be more hard-hitting when it comes to the Minister, the government questions and where we're going with it, whereas we are, and from that perspective and knowing both sides of how this equation works, is that the answers aren't always as forthcoming as you hope they would be. In the end, we're politicians. But when it comes to the public servants and the questions that they are asked, essentially we're trying to do it not as gotcha moments, but to get to the facts which they must provide us, and then therefore provide the public as well in hearing their responses. And it's also about that, I should say, that it gives the public, members of the public, a better idea and understanding for those who don't work in the sector to know the role of the public service, what they do, how they do it behind the scenes, and assist us both in opposition and in government. It gives a broader understanding generally, and from my perspective, that's what estimates should be about. It's not just line by line analysis of the budget. It is giving a greater and broader understanding of the role of government, the role of opposition, and what we do here in Parliament.
Thank you for that great response. Now, I might return to the room and see if there are any more questions here. Yes.
Tell us your name.
My name is Sarati. I have the question basically to probably the whole team. See, for all of us, the biggest challenge is money is never enough. Okay, so I really want to understand how actually you balance the public promise versus delivery, and how that is ensured that it is actually not cutting the corners for the public.
Very good question. You might
Well,
want-
look, so thank you, Mr. Sarati, for your question. Yes, that is true. I mean, we always wish we had more resources, but, money is taxpayers' money, so we should always prioritise their expenditure efficiently and also to promises any government may actually make. So I think for me, and I know that from my other ministers, it's about prioritising, our commitment to the public as part of our election platform, and also reform areas there where the government believes it's important to address. Sometimes events happen in politics, as former late British Prime Minister would say, events, my dear boy, events. So sometimes you have to address those as they arrive. But often I think if you're focused, if you've prioritised what you've got, and also managing expectations amongst the stakeholders and the public is part of how you manage your budget, because there isn't enough resources. We also have to spend those resources effectively because they're fundamentally taxpayers' money. We can't keep on going back to the taxpayer to say, look, we need more money. You have to demonstrate value and demonstrate effectiveness and demonstrate progress in what you've actually done.
Yes, and that is a great question. And good governance is about good management, isn't it? And at home, we know how to manage our household budgets and live within our means. And that's also required if we're going to deliver good government. Speaking from an opposition perspective, right at the moment, they're not questions that we have to answer. That is something that those in government have to answer. But for me, from a personal perspective, I think, and tapping into what the Minister said there as well, a really important part of that is managing expectations. I know that there's, and sometimes rightly so, a lot of public criticism of politicians for making many, many promises and then not always delivering on those promises. So it's being real with the voters to say what can and can't be delivered, living within our means, offering that good governance, good management, but also providing for our communities. In the end, we are elected to be here to deliver for the people of New South Wales. So we must do that. But goodness forbid, we wouldn't want to be using public funds to buy votes now, would we?
And all I would add, excellent answer. So all I would add to it is that from a public service point of view, very much the effectiveness of our delivery of government priorities, the efficiency with which we do that delivery is incredibly important. For me personally, I tend to think about effectiveness first and efficiency second. So what do we need to achieve? What's the best way to achieve it? And then within that, what's the most efficient use of resources that will get you where you need to go? And you'll see that in budget estimates sessions where public servants are reflecting on the implementation programs, how we've given effect to policy, showing that we've done that efficiently, showing that we've done that effectively. They're the kinds of focuses you'll see out of public servants in the budget estimates process, is to really narrow down on that. Whereas questions that might go to a minister might be about why did you prioritise that policy over that policy. There might be some questions around those kind of things. The public service is more within that policy. How did you go about doing it? What are the facts, the figures, the data that supports that kind of way of working and working through that way?
Thank you. We've received many online questions, actually. And there's one about collaboration across parties. Does the committee collaborate on preparing the questions for budget estimates hearings to ensure that members don't double up? And does this happen across parties at all? So perhaps I might turn to you first.
For the
Mrs.
opposition.
Overall. Yeah.
To a degree, yes, and I guess it's a little bit different for my side of politics compared to the minister, because obviously we're in a coalition with the National Party, with the Liberal Party. So we do that. We do have broad discussions around, it's the appointment of who will be serving on which session of estimates. But then also having an idea, and that factors into the research that you do to be prepared for estimates on the type of area that other members will be going to during the course of their questioning as well. Because again, some of the ministers will attend more than one session dependent on their roles and responsibilities. So there is a degree of not collaboration as such, but ensuring that that you're talking with each other. Again, to come back to opposition, with so few resources, with so few staff members to help you, you want to be as efficient and on point as you possibly can. You also don't want to waste the minister or the public servant's time when you're in there. You have a short period of time. You have that day to do it. With the minister, it's only 3 hours, and you want to ensure that the questions that you're asking are getting to the heart of where you need to be. So yes, there is a degree of collaboration as such, but it's more that you are not falling over each other, that you are looking at different aspects and different angles of eliciting as much information as you possibly can, again, to ensure that it's there on the public record.
Thank you. We might return to the room and see, yes, we have a question at the back.
Hi. I do understand that budget estimates does seem excruciating, but I think perhaps towards the journalists, I think that was one of the background I did here. How much does, I would say, public media play in the scrutinization of budget estimates outside of internal discussions in the parliament? Because I do understand in a democratic environment like Australia, we do have free speech. And based on seeing, I think even up to recently, Penny, I think it was the Minister, Penny Wong, and some discussion on live news. And we do know Australia is very renowned in its ability to ask hard-hitting questions on air. So how much does Parliament control media, or perhaps ensure media is pretending accurate information to the public pertaining budget estimates? Just to ensure that we do see some conflicting arguments in the media recently of Western media being manipulated and the likes. Do you have anything to say on that? Thanks.
I'm sure the minister would like to say that he does control the
Yeah,
media.
sure.
But
The short answer is we don't control the media at all. Freedom of the press is a good thing, not a bad thing. Certainly the role of media and social media now, because information is no longer disseminated just through TV or radio. I mean, I gather a majority of our population get their news from their phone or from their tablets. Whether the original source may well be a news outlet. So in that sense, what's happening in contemporary media matters, because it could well be, it could well influence the questions you may get asked. So, and obviously if it's a topical issue and it's a good news for the government, obviously we want to continue that media, but it's not so good news for the government. I suspect the opposition will want to continue to control on that. So, I mean, certainly we want to get our good stories out and the good things that we've done. There's nothing wrong with political self-interest, as former Prime Minister would say. In this sense, we always try to promote the good things that we're doing, and getting that news out is, a part of our job. And of course, part of the opposition's job is to do the reverse.
Well, from both a politician and former journalist perspective, I am very passionate about the fact that the freedom of the press is everything and absolutely critical to everything we do from a democratic process. That's my bill. That's my bill, if you'll excuse me.
Just one of the things that I reflect on sometimes is that there is a interaction between the work of the Parliament and what happens in the media that can go in both directions. So if we think about scrutiny more generally, there's budget estimates, of course, as the Minister would be very aware, the call for papers that the upper house can do, Standing Order 52, and calling for papers as another way of getting scrutiny. Both through budget estimates and through other scrutiny mechanisms, sometimes information comes to light that then is a matter of public interest that the journalists will pick up and run with. And in the last term of the previous government, the then opposition was able to raise many issues through these scrutiny mechanisms, which then got a little bit of traction in the media, or in some cases a lot of traction in the media, bringing more scrutiny to bear, which meant that the next time there was budget estimates, there was maybe different questions and more questions that came up. So there is a real relationship with what this scrutiny process brings to bear. I mean, the purpose of the Parliament is to make law, of course, but it's also to scrutinise the executive is a core function of the Parliament. It is those checks and balances in our democratic system that make the democratic system work. It's why power is not concentrated in one person or one institution. And what I see is this really, at its best, a very healthy relationship between the work done in the Parliament and then what journalists can do with that information outside as well. I don't know if you think
No, I think that's right. I mean, we all, accountability, it's within the Parliament, but also within the public as well. So the press, the media, long may the freedom of media stay. I think it's an important part of our institution. It's also the expectation of every Australian that no one, is above the law, and that people should be held accountable for the work that they do or the work that they don't do.
Well, thank you very much. Now, for our online audience, I would just like to quickly add that the upper house bill is going off, and which is why Mrs. Overall excused herself.
And if the lower house bill starts as well, it'll just be me for a little while talking to you all. So,
Yeah, and as you can see, that's the there's joy and despair in working in Parliament. Now, actually, but that gives me a good opportunity to go to a couple of online questions for the Minister and you, Mark. And it's about answering questions. What's your best advice for answering tricky questions? When you know that there's an angle and they're trying to catch you out, how do you respond? And I'll just add a second question to that as well. How do you manage your physiological responses to being grilled?
Well, look, I think you answered if you've got an answer to the question, you just state it. If you don't answer, I think in one sense, being honest is not an unreasonable a trait to have in budgets, but also I think you do have to think about not only the questions that are being asked, but the questions that are actually coming. So where is this question going? And if it's not a road you want to go down, then obviously you don't want to give an answer that that takes you down that particular road, because opposition, it's their job to lead you down a particular way or trying to demonstrate you in a particular light. So your job is not to be sensitive to it, and to make sure that you're always stating what you're doing and what the government's doing on a good front. So yeah, look, physiologically, I think it depends on the issue of the day. I mean, if you've got a huge crisis, so to speak, before estimates or a week before estimates, then I think you're going to be in a very different state of physical and psychological mind than if you've got a portfolio, a set of portfolios where there's no bad news or not news of that type, high risk extent. So it's circumstantial, I suppose, is what I'd say. That would influence your sense of being.
I won't speak on behalf of all public servants. For me personally, estimates is exhausting because you are thinking about, exactly as the Minister said, you're thinking about what question have I just been asked? Why have I just been asked that question? What is the next question going to be? What did I say to the last question that might have led us down this particular path? What is that other member over there who I also know is interested in this topic are going to be taken out? You are where in my folder is the facts and figures that I'm looking for? Why is my advisor tapping me on the shoulder? Does that mean I've just said something really, really stupid? Like you are thinking at multiple levels constantly for the entire time that you're there. And for me personally, it is like it's mentally exhausting, and that translates into being physically exhausting as well. I think there's a level at which people don't quite realise just how much stuff a minister or a senior public official is thinking about when they are giving an answer to what might on the face of it seem like a relatively innocuous kind of question going through. The only other thing I would say is that the point I made at the start about not necessarily accepting the framing of a question is incredibly important. It's very easy to react to a question and be taken down a path that perhaps might not be a fair articulation of the issue in question. Everyone frames, an old boss of mine used to say, where you stand depends on where you sit. Everyone frames a question from the perspective that they are bringing to it. I did find out recently that is actually a Nelson Mandela quote. I've been saying an old boss of mine used to say where you stand for years, like decades, literally, and I'm now worried that there's a lot of people that think I work for Nelson Mandela at some point. So I will correct the record here with you all and say I did not. It was a different old boss of mine. But so sometimes if it's a tricky question, I think the first part of the question was, what if you get asked a tricky question, sometimes why are you reacting to it like it's a tricky question? Sometimes it's in the way the question has been framed. If a question gets asked, I'm sure you will agree, Mark, that it would be the rankest hypocrisy to claim blah, blah, blah. What do you think about X? Surely you would agree it would be the rankest hypocrisy. Part of the question is a framing that puts then your answer into a particular context. It's very important, especially as a public servant, to remain politically neutral in what you're doing. But political neutrality does not mean political naivety. I think it's important to get that balance between the two right.
Now, as part of my job, I often have student groups here at the Parliament and we take them into question time. Now, there was one former member who privately told me that in his opinion, we shouldn't be taking students into question time but budget estimates, because he thought it was a real showcase of our democracy in action. And he spoke at length about the value of quite powerful people voluntarily coming in to answer questions. And he thought it was a wonderful thing. Can I invite your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that sentiment?
I mean, the whole democratic system that we have, the Westminster system, is based around the idea that power should not be concentrated in one person, one institution, the separation of that power, the checks and balances that come from that. The minute people start to say, I don't think there shouldn't be budget estimates because it's much more efficient for me to make a decision as a minister if I don't have to actually front up and explain that. As soon as people start down that pathway, then you start to see the concentration of power in one particular part. So I think it is powerful that ministers, senior public servants, all are willing to step out into a public domain and talk about what is going on is an incredibly powerful. I would say it's not just powerful, it is fundamental to our democracy continuing in the way that it does. You do not have to look far around the world to see that democracy is not a given. It is not something that just happens once and then goes on forever. It requires constant vigilance. It requires constant reaffirmation of things like separation of powers, constant reaffirmation of things like not concentrating power, checks and balances, and the right. And the dedication that I see in the public sector, the dedication I see amongst ministers of both political persuasions to that ideal of making sure that power is examined, I think is fundamental. I think it is incredibly powerful, but I also think it is fundamental to us continuing to have the society that we have at the moment. Something I feel very strongly about, as you can tell.
Thank you, Mark. Did you have anything to add,
Nichole,
Minister?
did you want?
I'll let you go
Yeah.
first.
Oh, look,
Mr.
I
come
mean,
back in halfway
I've
through that question.
I've been in both question time and budget estimates. I think both are important. I don't think they're two different forums, but both I think have the same fundamentals. That is, the questions are a total surprise. You don't know where the questions are going to come from and what focus is going to be. So it means that as a minister, you really have to be on your game, because it is a closed audience, so to speak, including the public gallery, but also amongst your colleagues. It's a way to demonstrate that you're on top of your work. And when you're not, I think it can be quite telling when you go missing on that. So in this sense, I think our Westminster system is world's best in terms of the democratic process, the accountability, the accessibility of our public representatives to the community at large. I just think it's something really special, and it's something we should all be proud of, and I think something we all play a role in. And long may compulsory voting stay. And I do think, whilst people may say, well, why do I have to vote? But I would say it's a civic contribution in building the nation. Every few years we ask every citizen of Australia to put a number or put anything on a ballot paper. Sometimes it's not a number, sometimes it's funny pictures, but nevertheless, everybody gets their vote. And I think what that does, the influence that has on our institutions, that it spreads the middle spectrum wider, and that our policies are very centrist We make sure that our middle class and our egalitarian state in our institutions still is maintained for as many Australians as we can, and we're not hijacked by powerful, well-resourced, vested interest groups that can actually over-influence governments of any political persuasion. So in this sense, every form that we have to make our democracy more transparent, more accountable, I think it's a good thing.
Thank you. And Mrs. Overall, thank you for rejoining us.
It's okay, we won the vote, it's fine.
I had just shared that there was a former member who was encouraging us in the education team to take students into budget estimates, because in his opinion, budget estimates was one of the processes that really showcases the strength of democracy by forcing powerful people to answer questions. And I was just inviting comments on that.
Yes, no, and I'd certainly agree, and both with the Minister and Mark, but very strongly back Mark in that as well. The separation of powers, it is critical. The democratic process, the robustness of our process, and to come back to, when I just left halfway through, it's like my mouth open once more. The freedom of the press is part of that as well. It is critical to our ongoing democracy that we are very, very fortunate to have in this country. And it was Churchill, or I think at least attributed to Churchill, who said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. So, we should not take that. We should not take that lightly, and by encouraging more people to be involved, to have that opportunity for the engagement with the budget estimates process and to see what it is that we do and why we do it, while to a degree there is an element of political point scoring. In the end, we are in politics, and it is about getting your side's points and arguments across. We are also attempting to score those points for good reason, to ensure transparency, accountability, and in service to you as the people of New South Wales and to the country more broadly. So I think for young people to come and want to be engaged and involved in that process, it is a really powerful thing. And just coming back quickly to the point that Mark was making about ensuring the safety of our democratic system, because it can too easily degrade, as we have seen, and we know what happens when we don't have that separation of powers. When one element does become too strong and too powerful, well, that descends to dictatorship. So we should be very mindful and encouraging of how we can get more people involved in every possible way.
Thank you very much. Now, it's almost time, so I would just like to turn to the room to see if anyone for a last question. Yes, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm trying not to sound like a politician, but my question is the role of the Legislative Council. So the core purpose of the Legislative Council is to review the executive. Is the Legislative Council adequately resourced for the task at hand?
No.
I'd say yes, over-resourced.
Absolutely not.
Obviously, we're in complete agreement. 1 + 1.
And I'm in the middle.
And the question relates to the fact is the Legislative Council asking the right questions in terms of getting the balance right and over what government spends and how it spends. So if I think of two examples, and I'm trying to stay away from politics, but for example, the Northern Beaches contract, and another example would be the tolling, where there's contracts that have been entered into by the state that are decades long. Does the process properly allow for the scrutiny of those decisions, and is the MLC getting the balance right in the estimates review as to what the current government is spending its money on, because as we know, your roles might be reversed in a next election, etc.
Fingers crossed.
And how the public service is administering that. And thank you for being here tonight. This is terrific.
Oh, thank you all for being here.
Thank you for coming.
And look, it is a really great question, and I'm not being political in the answer when I say, is opposition resourced enough, whether it's us or whether it's the other side, is no. As I mentioned to you, I have one staffer to handle the workload that we have. What I will say, and I'm sure that the Minister can agree with me on this, having come from so recently those opposition benches, what you do in opposition is get really good at it and you have to be disciplined and focused and have a great methodology in how you handle these things. So to hark back to what I said at the beginning of the evening, while I think I had not too bad a grasp of the first budget estimates, I know going into the next budget estimates I'm going to be even more prepared and on point, and the more I do it, the better I will get. So I would say that when you do opposition really well and you get a handle on how to do opposition well, when you come to government, it already gives you a leg up because you know what it is on the other side. But in terms of achieving that balance, does it make it more difficult? It does. And I don't honestly think that either side of politics wants to make opposition more difficult just for their own political benefit. So could more be done in terms of assisting in that space? I believe yes, and it probably should be. But that's another whole round of questions and political hectoring that we'd have to go through to get to that point. But yes, for me, I'm really, really mindful of how can I do the most effective job in the most effective way possible, and that's ensuring the best use of my time. The one thing that I will say is that I have many, many people say to me, you know, am I enjoying the upper house compared to the lower house? I'm absolutely loving the upper house. And as I said, it is very, very different. But one of the things they ask me is, do I like the upper house so much because there's less work? That is totally, absolutely not the situation. But I do think that's a bit of the public perception as well, that we come in, we do 3 sitting days till a minimum of 10 o'clock at night every sitting day, I should point out as well, minimum. And then we go home because we don't have electorates as such to look after, that's the end of our workload. But I hope, as you've heard here this evening, that is far from the situation. And any possible way that we can do our job better from the House of Review's point of view for both sides of politics is only going to be to the benefit of the people of New South Wales and the democratic process in the long run, in my personal perspective.
Well, look, having come from opposition to government, yes, I think certainly you appreciate government a lot more than you do in opposition. So that's why you treasure it. You do your job well, you do it for the right purposes, you do it for the public interest and the public value. You've got to be on top of your game.
A couple of just very quick points because I know we're out of time. The first is probably think about scrutiny more broadly than just budget estimates. So we've mentioned 3 scrutiny mechanisms today. We've mentioned the question time, we've mentioned budget estimates, of course, which is why you're all here, but we've also mentioned the call for paper power that both houses have.
Which is what my vote just was. It was just a call for papers, yes, yeah. SO 52.
And indeed, the LA had their first call for papers a year or so ago for many decades. Going through because, of course, the government does not have a majority in the lower house either. So if everyone gets together, then they can ask for something like that to happen as well. But then there's also the Auditor General, there's the Ombudsman, there's ICAC, there's all these... the Auditor General can do performance audits, the Ombudsman can look into matters of public interest around maladministration and the like. There is just all of these different mechanisms which are all designed to be those checks and balances. So you could look at any one of them and say, could that one be more powerful or could that one be better resourced? But also look at all of them working together to try and make sure that that scrutiny happens. And just as a matter of record, opposition is a function of the Parliament, and I do believe it needs to be resourced differently to how it is my personal opinion of it. I would also say, though, to give fair and balance, that ministers do a huge amount of work dragged outside of their electorates all the time, and I do think that different support for ministers to make sure that local electorate work should also be contemplated as well. So therefore, I've just given resources to both sides of politics. And don't forget about the crossbench in all of this as well. We have record-sized crossbench in both the upper house and the lower house. 13 in the lower house, 12 in the upper house. No government has controlled the upper house in New South Wales since 1988. So we have a long history of scrutiny in the upper house, and a lot of the practices there have built up over time because of that long period without government dominance in the upper house as well. So all these things kind of work together, I guess, is my general point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Now, I'm afraid that's all the questions we have time for tonight, and I will have to draw the discussion to a close. Now, as we saw and heard, Parliament is sitting today, and our panel has joined us at a time that's incredibly busy for them. Could you please all join me in thanking them?
Thank you.
And I would also like to thank you, our audience, for making this such a fun evening. Just a couple of quick things before I let you all go. You would have been given one of these when you've arrived, and for our online viewers, there will be a QR code that's popping up on your screen at the conclusion of this event. What it is it's going to take you to a very short survey, an evaluation survey on how you found this event. It will be great if you can complete it because it's always helpful to get constructive feedback.
So for all positive comments, it's Nichole Overall. Anything negative, it's Minister.
I'll take it.
Actually,
I'm
no,
in government, I'm always used to criticism.
I think my role in the Parliament, any negative thing you have to say about either of our members can be directed at me. That is.
Now, our next public event will be on the 13th of August, and we'll be celebrating 100 years since the election of Millicent Preston Stanley.
Yeah, lovely.
As the first female member of our Parliament. We'll be updating our website with more information on that event very soon. Thank you again for coming, everybody, and I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Nichole.